I would like to introduce our moderator for today's event, Chris Adderton, Vice President of CSCMP. Take it away, Chris.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our podcast today. Joining me today is Justin Stone, SVP of Customer Success at Deposco, and Jerome Dubois, co-CEO of Six River Systems. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Good to be here.
You know, labor is a hot topic right now since it's something so many businesses are struggling with. To get started today, let's take a quick poll from the audience on turnover rates and show the results of that poll. Currently, 52% of companies say hiring and retaining qualified workers is their greatest challenge, with annual warehouse turnover rates in the US at over 43%. This results in panic hiring rates higher than desired, mistakes on orders, and an inability to roll out emerging technologies to drive future growth, all risking customer experiences. Everything else in your supply chain could be flawless, but if the people involved in the final touch of your orders are not there, the next sale won't be either in very short order. Today, we are going to review the 3 R's: readiness, retention, robotics, and how each can help to reduce the pains in your labor management. So let's jump to it and let's quickly review the results of the poll. So it looks like the group collectively showing that this is not a unique problem. Everyone's sharing the same concerns, and the rates are consistent with what we found out in our poll. So let's move on to the next slide. Readiness, retention, and robotics, the 3 R's. Why are these so important to the labor management? All of these have a great effect on turnover. Let's move to the readiness slide, please. Making sure the processes are in place first to establish the critical steps to success. Nick, can we go to the readiness slide, please? Having a slight lag and delay. In the meantime, why don't we keep moving? Justin, why don't you take us through the first step as we catch up on the slides and talk about the importance of readiness in the 3R process.
Yeah, sure thing, Chris. From a readiness perspective, you know, to me, it's really important because you can't hire the right people without knowing what you're hiring them to do. In my mind, it comes down to the typical triad of process, people, and technology. You know, certainly process before people and technology. You know, I'm a big fan of, for example, of Simon Sinek and, you know, start with the why and kind of a value creation mindset. So, you know, as you bring in the people and you layer in the technology, understanding why you're putting them in place and really the value aspect of what their daily jobs are intended to do and the value creation for the business is intended to be are really important. And as we'll get to in really the retention side, understanding that value is equally important. So, you know, from a readiness perspective, it's really kind of table stakes. You know, I think back to like my experience in the software technology space for the last 20 years and coming from like the vendor side of things, RFPs, you know, can be very tedious, but there is a level of like qualification that I think is asserted when you see like customers that come to us that have gone through the exercise already of like scoping and blueprinting their processes. And, you know, in fact, when I see those things and I see customers that know what they want to do, I see it as really one of the biggest factors to success in those technology projects. So, you know, the abilities to do some process mapping for both current state and future state for that reason is super important so that you're layering the people into very specific jobs. I think, of course, that changes with the size of a company. You know, if you're a growth stage business, you know, likely a person wears multiple hats, and there's something to that versus, you know, larger scale and you get into specialization. but it is that process that enables you to really navigate, things such as like changes in scope of the business, to things like we've gone through with the pandemic in terms of needing to be super flexible. And those things are why I feel readiness is the great foundation that it is.
That's great. Let's go to the slide on can't hire the right people without knowing, Nick, and then Jerome, can you kind of expand upon this a little bit?
Yeah, I think interestingly enough, when it comes to readiness, I think there's a lot that you have to kind of understand going into these projects, or to generally improvement itself, and that's that fourth P around performance. And I think you really have to have a good benchmark for performance to be able to really establish what those benefits are going to be. And that may sound strange, knowing that you're going to launch into process and automation investments, but without that, again, you have to think through. You really have to kind of quantify the volumes, your order profiles, your turnover, your accuracy levels, service level costs, et cetera, et cetera. You really have to have a strong understanding of that for engaging in these projects from readiness perspective. And then secondly, I would add that you have to think about how these projects, especially from an automation perspective, are going to interact with the systems that you have in place. So, technology readiness, infrastructure, your WMS systems, your network systems, your power systems, all those things need to be taken in place, as well as layout and the readiness of the facility itself. So
that's great. Nick, let's go to the next slide on retention and kind of get into the second R. And it's important because once you've made those investments that you've just both articulated in preparation for bringing the organization together, it's probably even more important than just the acquisition. Once a business has processes in place or has revamped processes to be more optimal, it's time to look at the next R, retention. We know that this is a tough R right now for many businesses, almost universally. I think many people look at this R as continuing to pay more and more for their workers to get them to stay, which seems logical since pay has ranked #1 in the priority list of warehouse job workers for 11 straight years. However, businesses are still seeing high turnover despite acquisition of talent and continuous recruiting. Jerome, what are some of the ways to help to retain workers from your experience?
Well, I think, when you look at the investments that can be made in automation and technology, one of the areas that people get excited about is that specifically in robotics, it actually makes the work environment much safer. And robots, particularly robots like those at Six River, are designed to work with people day in, day out. So it's a very safe environment. It's not about cages and restrictions and light curtains and all those types of things. It really is a collaborative robotic environment. And these robots can actually see and stop and move much more quickly and nimbly in many cases than humans can, pushing a very heavy cart. You have to imagine what these people are using to operate in the warehouse. Heavy carts. Some of our customers are, their operators dragging 300, 400, 500 pound carts around with water and paper and those types of things. So, the safety and the movement. Secondly, I think strain on the body. We see a lot fewer issues in terms of workers' comp and injuries and those types of things. So again, making that work environment much safer. It's also much easier to learn in systems like ours than it would be in a traditional paper and cart-based system or even an RF system. We have robots that actually physically lead the associates through the entire process, physically leading them to locations, telling them what to do on the screen, and they have visual confirmations on the screens. They have big buttons and lights and sound. So they're trained on how to do the job incredibly quickly. Where traditionally a paper-based process with carts could take 2 or 3 weeks, now you're taking 2 or 3 hours to train associates, and people really enjoy that. And it also challenges them to improve. The last couple of points, I would just simply say that the robots are also very, very good at eliminating a lot of walking. So again, from a physical fatigue perspective, we're seeing people are much happier in their jobs. They have more energy when they're done at the end of the shift. So it does eliminate a lot of the walking, both from bringing the work to the associates in the aisle, and then also reducing the pick path of the associates while they're serpentining through the aisles to assemble those orders. And then, as I mentioned, from a retention perspective, even worst case, if you can't retain those associates, that training really, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, that training can really accelerate bringing associates back up to speed, and new hires and associates up to speed. So, definitely a lot of areas where the technology can help certainly retain and attract different types of people into the environment in the warehouse.
Great. A little more detail on that. So it really is a qualitative and a quantitative improvement in the experience, both from the technology application and from the human capital that's exposed as well. Can you talk about an example of that, if you will, before we get to a poll?
Yes. So from our perspective, I think we talk a little bit about reduction in hours due to injury, significantly reduction in terms of walking time. So there's 50% less walking in warehouses where we have some of these automations like ours, the 6 River automation. And then I think from an injury perspective, actually from a retention perspective, what we've been able to see across our entire customer base is, in fact, one of our case studies at Liberty Hardware, they were going through 25 to 28% annual turnover of their full-time employees. That's now down to 3 to 5% annual turnover. So dramatic reduction in terms of turnover, which really has allowed them to improve their accuracy, improve their service levels and performance.
So qualitatively, a higher job satisfaction. Does that also potentially open up a broader labor pool that might not otherwise consider a warehouse type work?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that the fact that the job can be learned in just an hour or two really opens it up to folks that haven't worked in warehouse environments, and it's much safer, so they don't need levels of certification that they normally would for MHE equipment or anything like that. They don't have to understand all the function buttons that are required for RF, and so we see a lot of opening up of that labor pool and bring people in that maybe have less experience or have never done the work before. Certainly lessening the burden on our customer base in terms of attracting labor at peak seasons.
So it sounds like one of the challenges all of us will face, including CSCMP, is to explain that the warehouse work of the past is not potentially the warehouse work of the future, and it's a much more attractive environment to access and to join the critical essential work that's done in this space, it sounds like to me.
Right.
Can we go to the poll slide real quickly, Nick? That'd be helpful. So less walking equals more productivity, as Jerome indicated. On average, how many miles does the group think a legacy system warehouse worker travels in a day? So we'll wait to get a few responses here. Justin, once we get this result, I'll kind of pivot to you again and talk a little bit about, some of the impact of this, so you can kind of set the stage for what we think the responses will be.
Sounds good.
Nick, I think the polling slides are going to take a little longer, but we can just pause for a minute. The qualitative piece, I think, is important on the job market. We're seeing that in other areas as well. Just from a personal experience, a lot of the discussion around autonomous vehicles has been the quote driver shortage, but in my practical experience, it's really a driver utility issue and the driver experience. And autonomous vehicles and vehicle enhancements have done similar things for the drivers, making the driver experience a little bit better. Results are in now, so the assumption was 12 miles for the worker walks per day. Productivity improvements looking good, and 5 miles is the second most popular choice. Justin, can you kind of talk to the reality of what we're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. 12 miles is the correct answer there for a legacy system warehouse worker. While, if you look at, kind of a non-legacy, more modern, it's common to be kind of in that 3 to 5 is what we've seen in our customer base. And, this plays into retention very much. And when I think about like the Deposco customer, typically it's somebody that on the target market is graduating from maybe their ERP system and needing more technology in place, that have come from paper-based environments. And while you've got the need for very talented workers, because they have to know where everything is in a warehouse environment. And basically, they're picking one order at a time and a piece of paper. And you can imagine, going to walk an entire facility for one order, coming back to grab another order, and then doing the exact same while having to know exactly where all the inventory is. That undoubtedly creates a lot of walking time versus, when you layer in, whether it's Six River or Deposco, you've got more of a directed environment, directed task-based environment that can, create the most efficient walking paths for employees and greatly reduce it down to that 3 to 5 miles versus the 12. And while that's probably good for somebody like me who needs it from a figure perspective, like in a retention world, that can be a wear and tear on somebody's body, to Jerome's point. And so, you look at retention in general as a super important piece. Pretty much every operations that I go into, there's like 3 top things that COOs and owners and CEOs are talking about, and it's either warehouse space and how much the price is going up, or how little warehouse space is available. It's supply chain disruption, and can they actually get the items that they need? And then it's really this people side of things. And if you're in a metro environment, your labor pool is a little bit higher, obviously, but with the pricing of warehouse pushing more people out into the suburbs and beyond, that does create even more strain on like the ability to hire people and talent and keep that retention level high. And some of the stats that I've seen lately are like, it's about $8,500 to replace a worker. And you look at a 100 worker operation, and over the course of a year, that adds up fairly quickly to about $365,000. So you can see very quickly how, actually improving your retention is very important. Some of the things that I've seen in terms of looking at retention, just from more of like a macro perspective, would be that you want to hire the right people from the start. Think about, your compensation and benefits packages. You've got to really think about hiring and investing to create mid-level managers and career paths within the operations. Staying close so that you're training. Jerome, I think you even hit on kind of like performance measures as a big component of that. Again, kind of going back, if you've got the right process and you have a target metric in mind and your goals in mind, you can then quantitatively coach people as well to create more satisfaction in their job versus, just going, hey, pick more, or, I need you to ship more orders today. Like, okay, you got to understand what the unit economics of your people are so that you can retain and ultimately promote. And I think that comes down to, even some of like gamification and that performance tracking piece. So, that's how I've seen it, just kind of from that macro perspective, walking into a number of operations over time.
Before we go to the gamification piece, everybody talks about the retention component. Once you've spent the time and money for training, obviously tenured employees generally are safer and more committed to the outcomes. And you mentioned the performance metrics. I've not met many people that take a job and plan to fail, right? Most people come in, and there's a demographic change going on too that I've heard a lot about. I just recently attended the FMI midwinter executive event, and almost everyone without exception on either the retailer or the manufacturer side said retention is their key issue, and how they're becoming taking a different view at a very expensive and important input component, which is now labor, right? Where historically labor had been more readily available than it is today, certainly, and people have fewer options, particularly with remote working. So this is probably one of the most broadly based descriptions, no matter what industry you're in, about sourcing, retaining, and creating satisfaction for your longer term employees. Some of it's behavioral. Some of it's the fact that I think there's a demographic change and people are dealing with more responsibilities personally in their family lives, and they need some more flexibility to get this done. But if you accept the flexibility requirement, I think it makes a big difference. So obviously one way to do that is make the job more interesting, safer, easier to do. And then the next topic is really talking about gamification that can help with productivity measures and having people sort of self-evaluate as they're going through their days. So Nick, can you put up the gamification slide, and I'll come back to Justin on this topic and let him kind of explain a little bit how it can be applied.
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back to really, if you're not measuring it, how do you improve? It's important to be able to set benchmarks, and then it's important to be able to understand as a leader, how to coach your people quantitatively. And so there's a bit of a leadership aspect to this, but also even amongst like peers in the organization, kind of knowing where you stack up to create just that competitive environment and fuel kind of that competitive nature. I've seen work tremendously inside of operations. And so, of course, that again comes back to what do you have in the form of your abilities to capture this information, whether it be technology such as a warehouse management system or labor management system that's tied into it, or even from the Six River perspective as well. The ability to see that comes down to what are the value creation measures for your business, and incentivizing people, showing those to them in real time, and then bringing that back to I'm a big proponent of like before action reviews and after action reviews, to sit down and look at the performance over a period of time and where you make general adjustments, because that starts to create ownership as well. And so all of these things tie together in terms of retention, readiness, et cetera. So for me, it's a mindset versus anything else.
Jerome, can you give me your perspective on this as well? Expand a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I think what's interesting is we provide software that works with WMSs like Deposco, as well as down to the associate level, the UI, the user experience with the robot and the screens that the associates work with. What we found in testing different gamification techniques is that there are really 4 major things that people are looking for. One, first and foremost, Chris, you absolutely said it right. People want to do their job well. By and large, most people want to go into a job thinking that I want to do it better, and I want to measure myself based on my performance day in, day out. So there's definitely a relative scoring in terms of self-improvement for associates and for managers. How are we doing today versus yesterday, or how am I doing this hour as opposed to last hour? The second thing to look at after the self-improvement is how am I doing versus my peers? And oftentimes that is one of those tricky areas where you don't necessarily want to compare absolutely against your peers, because you may have a situation where you just happen to get allocated a set of orders that are harder to pick than somebody else's set of orders. And we've always gone back to engineering standards. Right back in the time, we always looked at the weight and size of product and where I was picking from to kind of balance the work out across folks. But the rating is still important, but not the most important, as I mentioned. The other 2 points, people want to have some level of autonomy and know that they're empowered to make decisions on behalf of their job. So not having to run for an associate, not having to run back and try to find a supervisor or a lead every single time there's a problem. Give them the tools to try to resolve that problem and move past it very, very quickly. I think that's really confidence building for a lot of associates, and that enables and empowers them. And the last point I think is they want to have the tools to be able to improve. And I think Justin called on this as well. Provide the data, make that data visible so I can find areas where I can improve. Can I be better at identifying a product? Can I be better at scanning it? Can I be better at how quickly I place it, so I can learn and improve my competence? And they feel good about getting the tools. It's not just the demands of the job in terms of performing faster, but we're providing them the data by which they can learn, and for supervisors and managers to train their folks on that. So I think overall, gamification, if done well, really addresses some of the performance aspects that we're all looking for in order to get more throughput out of our building, but also that retention aspect, because you have a much higher morale within your team. And then I think, lastly, people really want to be part of a close-knit team. So sharing that data kind of brings people together. And what we've seen in our systems as an example is this ability of bringing the slowest pickers up to become faster pickers, and giving the faster pickers more tools to get better. But by and large, the team celebrates because they are becoming more performant over time. And there's a lot less there's a lot less deviation between the slowest and the fastest, and everybody starts celebrating because overall that performance is aligned and more consistent. I think that's what all operators are looking for. So
yeah, I've had practical experience. There's a compelling motivation, the power of comparative performance, right? But as long as it's done with the principle of overall success, right? And
right.
Best criteria have to be based on principles, not necessarily just simple rules that people feel constrained by, right? So here's our goal. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's why we're trying to do it. I know you guys are going to talk a little bit about the interoperability and understanding of what the work you do impacts others. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Yeah, and you know, there's some examples of how you guys have done some of this together. I think I got a note here that says you guys have worked with a couple clients in this space to actually do this. Can you talk quickly or just a little bit about that?
Justin, you want to take that? Oh.
Hey, Jerome, can you take that? I'm just having a technical difficulty. I'll be right back.
No problem at all. So yeah, we have done some work together at a couple customer sites. You know, one of them is Music Today. They're a great story of an entrepreneur kind of building a practice around fulfilling and supplying music, both the music itself and all the accessories, apparel, those types of things for bands. You know, I think what we've been able to do with Music Today is really bring them to the modern age, if you will, of technology with a much more modern, flexible WMS system with Deposco, state-of-the-art, flexible, process-driven, and then with our automation kind of integrated into that. And that was really kind of a big win for us last year as we started working together more closely out in the field. And you know, they've seen the results there where we've been able to double productivity and really reduce the carbon impact in terms of better cartonization, those types of things, and really make the operation more efficient. I don't know, Justin, if you want to add a bit more there.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, with Music Today, you know, as I recall them going through kind of their scoping and evaluation, it was, you know, a big question on like growth and profitability, and talking with their CEO, Dell. And so, you know, the combination of not only, like, if you think about supply chain in general, we oftentimes get looped into that kind of profitability, efficiency component of it. And what stuck out for me was like Dell's appreciation for where they were going as a business and the growth, and their ability to create a growth platform out of Deposco and Six River that would allow them to bring in additional SKU categories, enable, you know, more people into the business, and they're seeing that growth now, and beyond just the efficiencies that you're talking about, Jerome. And that's what really stood out for me with that business.
And the need for flexibility, which is what we're seeing from so many of our customers today, you know, not wanting to look at more nimble solutions and maybe giving up a little bit on the top end from a performance perspective, but regaining that from flexibility because they just don't know what their labor situation is going to look like. They don't know what their customer situation, their order profiles, product profiles, those types of things. So they're really putting a premium on that flexibility.
Yeah, agility is a critical aspect of people being able to adjust and react quickly to the level of uncertainty that's sort of unprecedented that we've all been experiencing. For the benefit of the audience, can you talk a little bit about the business that that client did, so they have some context on how they applied your technology a little bit?
Justin?
Yeah, sure, I'll take it. So Music Today is a third-party logistics company that is, you know, primarily focused on the distribution of like vinyl as well as apparel and accessories, you know, for musicians and in the music industry. And so they serve a number of clients, you know, out of their facilities, and, you know, primarily a fulfillment role, so pick, pack, and ship. Primarily direct to consumer as well. So when you mix like 3PL a number of different requirements and process flows based on those clients, based on the different SKU attributes and the variability that you see amongst that, rationalizing that down into standard processes and scalable processes is exactly where Deposco and Six Rivers came together in an integrated form to be a catalyst for that kind of direct-to-consumer fulfillment for them. So now they're able to onboard new clients in that genre very easily and train employees, that are coming in this, kind of retention mindset that we've been in here, easily train and onboard their new employees into that environment as well. So those were all kind of the key factors in that business.
It's pretty amazing, and being able to deal with uncertainty as well as variety, right, concurrently. So that's important. We've talked a little bit about strategy in the longer view. What are some of the other retention strategies that people can start right now? And Justin, I'll kind of stay with you for that moment and kind of get started, and we'll go to Jerome on that as well.
Yeah, from a longer term strategy perspective, I think I hit on this, but a little bit, but just kind of go through my notes here. Hire the right people from the start, set the right compensations, benefits package, training and kind of that mid-level manager onboarding or career pathing, and then achievement through like gamification. And I would say that the concepts that end up creating drag with turnover would just be things like, you can imagine a top performer leaving, the operations, you're going to see lost productivity inside of the warehouse for, what that person was responsible for. Likely some unhappy customers related to that as well, because you may see, error costs, you may see just, relationships with different partners and downstream customers, especially in a B2B environment, who are used to having that person that they would go to. And then, also you consider just like the ecosystem and the need to maybe put more technology behind it by having people leave. So, all of those things play into, why retention is important and what leads to the cost. But as I mentioned, the capabilities of retaining people aren't really that complex. It's just, that it is very important though for those reasons.
Yeah.
Jerome, can we get your perspective on some of this as well?
Yeah, listen, I think there are some very easy things that you can do very quickly to dress up, if you will, the operation and make it more exciting for people. One of the things as our customers do as part of our standard deployments today is we put large screen TVs out in the warehouse. So it's not just your old, whiteboard or pinboard with yesterday's reports. It's like right now, what's happening, where are things happening, where are things moving, who's doing what, and people get excited about that. We find that to be kind of a rallying area for people, so that leads, as an example, could point to the board and say, hey, 11 o'clock break, let's take a look at the performance so far today. And they can call out certain areas of opportunity for training and say, we're spending a bit more time or too much time doing this, that, or whatever. This operator's done a really nice job of doing the following things. So I think those widescreen TVs, they're pretty easy to get up there, and they're not super expensive to do that. And I think that's a very quick way of just getting data front and center and get people excited about the scoreboard, so to speak. A couple of other things. I do think that investments in technology that associates can use, like robotics, also has, as we talked about, it just makes it a bit more exciting for people from a retention perspective, and then the gamification. But I think it's a way of attracting talent, Chris, as you pointed out. It's not just about making it easier to do the job, but people want to go work with those types of automation because they see that and they know that that's the future. So we see this now as a career progression, career development opportunity where operators are seeking out warehouses where automation is being used because they see that as a valuable skill set for them to be able to advertise, and leads are doing that as well. So if you think about this in terms of, if you're running your warehouses, bringing in technology actually allows you to hire better people, to hire higher quality people, train them faster because they're attracted to the type of technology that you have available. So I think that is also a point of differentiation.
That's important, and certainly the work environment as well as the work itself is sort of the core of a retention strategy, right? It's why people invest in the environment they're in, and hopefully this space continues to do that overall, although it's very interesting how variable it is by industry. You know, we're fast approaching the need to review the third R, or robotics. Nick, can you move over to that slide? And we're going to talk about the technology now. And many people think robotics are a solution they can put in place quickly to replace people. However, that's not the case. Jerome, as the robotics guy, I'm going to turn to you for your expertise in this section. What are some of the foundational aspects that people need to consider before implementing robotics, and not considering the human and capital component of this, right? So I'll ask you to sort of open this up.
So I think there's a couple things. First of all, the types of robotics that I think are seeing acceleration in this space, dramatic acceleration faster than the norm, are robotics that don't replace people. They're actually collaborative robotics that are eliminating a lot of the unnecessary work that's in the warehouse, like the travel time and the walk times. Those are classic ones. Or like our robots, we call our robots Chuck, by the way. The Chucks work with the associates side by side, really teaching them how to do their job and be more efficient at it. So I think that's something that's really, really important. In fact, our customers say, as long as the robot's here, the associates here, like their people are required to work with them. And I think that makes it very, very exciting. I think, you know, a couple of the areas that you're touching upon, the foundational aspects, when people are putting business cases together, a couple of things to think about. One, it's not just the productivity improvement. That's a good, important one to start with. But what's also super important are things like accuracy levels, right? Understanding the cost of mispicks, understanding the cost of you know, replenishing correctly and mispicking potentially. So accuracy is super important. Service levels, right? So offsets if you're doing B2B and retail fulfillment, or sorry, direct to retail, or expedites for direct to consumer. So offsets can be very, very expensive if you're always missing SLAs, or you're you know, getting close to hitting, you know, the cutoff times and pull times of trucks. Those are other areas. And along with that, I think things like the training aspect that we've talked about a bunch of times. I think one area that people forget about is that if it takes me less time to train people, I don't need to have them, I don't have to hire them as early in peak season, as an example. So I can delay that hiring process. And that's an additional savings. It's not just having to have those people on staff and bring them on through, but I can delay that hiring and really allow them to learn much faster and get less turnover, as we talked about from a retention perspective. And the last thing I'll mention is the service level aspect isn't just about cost elimination. It could also be a revenue driver for customers. We had a customer as well talk about, and there's a case study online about it, how their search results, because of their service levels were improving in the warehouse, they went from 5% same-day SLA to 80% same-day SLA. That actually bumped up their search results in the marketplaces that they were selling through as a home goods provider, and they were selling to Wayfair and Lowe's and Home Depot and Walmart and those types of things. But because their service levels were better, their search results were bubbling up above their competition, which generated revenue for them. It was additional sources of revenue. So they were able to multiply, they effectively 3x to their online and direct-to-consumer business in 12 months, just because of that placement improvement due to service levels. So I think there's definitely a lot of areas that automation technology can help unlock for customers.
Yeah, and it's critical to understand the different service level agreements between, you know, direct to consumer or retail, because it's highly different. If you're in a large retail environment, you have choices still if an item you choose is out of stock. If you fail to deliver even once to a direct to consumer, you generally don't get the next purchase, right? Or certainly they'll be reticent, right? So those SLAs, and in a time where, you know, forecasting and planning is more difficult than ever, and the consumer behavior has whipsawed more rapidly than anyone can anticipate, your ability to be agile and return to that is important. Justin, can you share a little bit about the same topic, just expand upon it just a little bit?
From a robotics perspective, Chris?
Yeah, just from your experience.
I mean, what Jerome hits on, I think, is like super important to me from a client experience or customer experience perspective, and how it all ties together with what we do in our livelihoods. I've been on this big like value creation chain, and I'll whip that horse all the way through, just because supply chain to me, absolutely affects the top line revenue and the growth of things. And the more that I think we tie what we do inside of the four walls of a warehouse to those value creation metrics, such as customer experience and such as the growth of the business, makes a lot of sense. For 3PLs specifically, I've seen robotics really be another growth driver there, because they're able to go sell their capabilities to customers. It's definitely an arms race in the 3PL world. It's one of the hottest areas for growth, as everybody is, at least from a growth stage business perspective, are thinking about how much should I outsource. Costs are high, capex is high to go expand to another coast. Which 3PL partner should I be considering? And I know that's one of 6 Rivers like core customer segments, but that's absolutely an area of growth that's got that kind of arms race predicament behind it. And so to me, just coming from like Modex last week, it's a great environment to go see. You always see like the coolest cutting edge stuff. And yeah, exactly. So like actually getting to like how it actually operates, that's more Jerome's world. And I'd love to hear, Jerome, kind of like your mindset on, what's the right time to be thinking about robots and for our attendees here on the call.
Yeah, I think when you are kicking off your evaluation for robotics, I think there's as I opened the call with, there's a number of factors that you probably want to think about. The thing that I think most customers forget about is that the implementation does require some investment on their side. It's not about the vendor just showing up and doing all the work on your behalf. So going back to that first R around readiness, I think it really is an understanding of the culture and the impact that implementations of technology, any technology, will have on the culture of the operation, and your willingness to be open to that. I think that that's a challenge that some customers have. We're not talking about revolutionary, another R, not revolutionary change, especially with these types of quote unquote cobots or collaborative robotics that we're talking about here with 6 River. They're not highly disruptive from a warehouse perspective. You're not starting over. So I think it is a nice step change function. It allows you to kind of incrementally improve without having to really rebuild the entire organization. And again, that culture is really, really important in getting people prepared for that, whether it be the operator who's been there for 27 years, or the floor manager who just signed on 6 months ago, or your IT administrator who's been there for a long time. So I do think, and then just basically when you're looking at the numbers, going into an investment, you do want to be able to rationalize those numbers and understand where those benefits come from. As I mentioned in the previous segment, you've got performance improvements, but you also have accuracy, you also have service levels, you also have other things, training benefit, et cetera, to really look at, to use in your defense for these types of investments. Ultimately, we all know that automation is going to be the answer. It's just a question of when. And I think these types of automations that 6 River provide as an example, and there are others that are out there, really allow you to ease into that curve much earlier in your life cycle than historically. Having been in the automation and robotics space in supply chain for a while now, 15 years, it used to be that only the biggest and best companies could go and afford this technology. And what's happened with customers, with companies like Deposco and 6 River working together, it lowers the cost of deploying those technologies and the complexity of deploying those technologies. So any company, really, truly any company, can deploy out these technologies to modernize their operation.
Yeah, at the core, it is always change management that predicts the success, right? And preparing the ground. And it's never the vocal critic you have to worry about. It's the passive resistor who has some other control point that feels like they've gotten security out of their historical knowledge. And if you break that down and systematize it, they have to be shown that they will still be valued, and they're sharing that knowledge with others can make the whole organization more successful and perpetuate the jobs going forward. I think that's a critical aspect. I've had a couple large projects of my own, and generally, if you don't prepare the ground, you're not going to have a very good outcome at the end, right? So I think that's critical.
But it's that democratization there, Chris, sorry. It's that democratization that, Jerome was talking about that I think is very key. And, I know for us, we really pride ourselves on, bringing the very best to like the mid-market type customers and growth stage, going anywhere from kind of like the $50 million type business to $1 billion and $2 billion. And, the fact that you can layer in technology in a way that maybe alters people's jobs, but doesn't necessarily replace people's jobs, is very satisfying because you're enabling, the growth of those businesses. So, for us, I think that's a key takeaway as well, is just that kind of democratization of where we are right now in the world.
When you're creating the competitive environment, you don't have to be massive in order to afford the robotics or the technology or whatever to get in. And if you apply it correctly, you can be very competitive. As we wrap up here, Jerome, what are some of the innovative ways you've seen the Six River System customers using the robotics to apply? And maybe a few examples would be helpful. And then we'll kind of get into the summary page, and then we're going to open this up to Q&A. We're pretty much on time. Usually when I'm the moderator, we run a little long, so we're pretty good being on time.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think there's a couple of nice examples here. We've seen customers be able to go from 3-shift to 2-shift operation as an example, because the additional throughput that they're seeing in the system that really makes life a lot easier for them, and certainly provides opportunities for those to develop into leads in second and first shift. So that's certainly a nice benefit. We've also seen folks eliminate, truly make changes in terms of their operation. In fact, one of our customers had 2 different physical areas of picking in their warehouse, and rather than having people drag carts back and through a high MHE traffic area, pit traffic area, they would let the trucks make that long run of 300 feet or so, eliminating any need for people to be in that traffic area, which actually was a big win for the associates. They got very excited about that, not having to worry about getting run over by a forklift, or pallet lift or anything like that. So, and I think also what we've seen, some interesting examples of our solution working in integrations with other types of automation. So the trucks, our robots, working in conjunction with things like box building and auto bagging on the front end. So you can get boxes that are built specifically to the product that are being picked to, and then that really is a nice experience for our customers and their customers in terms of the box opening experience, and really seeing good utilization of air and lower freight costs.
That's great.
Yep.
So we've talked about the 3 R's, right? Unlocking labor optimization, obviously, and we're going to go to Q&A here real quickly, but I saw one of them that came in. Have I seen a forecast? Have we seen a forecast on the situation in labor? The situation is not going to get any better for a lot of demographic reasons. I just was briefed on a global labor market study. The reality is the U.S. is projected to continue to show population growth, primarily because of immigration. The baby boomers, like me, are dying off, so there's a demographic issue there. They're leaving some of these senior positions. We hear that a lot in transportation and trucking. So that's just a quick question here, but just to recap quickly in the foundational elements of the 3R process we've been discussing today on readiness, retention, and robotics, I think you see sort of the core principles of building a pyramid for success, which I think is important. And we are going to go to some of the questions now. Let me just pull these down, see a few more. Looking ahead to the future of work in the warehouse, what are some of the big technology-driven changes you think we'll see in the next 5 years? So a longer-term view, and I'd like Justin or Jerome to kind of address one of those.
Can you repeat the question there, Chris? I was looking forward to it.
It says, looking ahead for future of work in the warehouses, instead of looking at the near-term issues we're dealing with, what other technology-driven changes do you anticipate we'll see in the 5 to longer term 10-year window? Is there other new technology perhaps on the horizon that would expand upon what you guys are already doing? People always talk about AI, right? That's the critical, the one that everyone sort of brings up. A lot of work to be done in that space.
Yeah, you know, we hear a lot about obviously AI and machine learning, which to me comes down to really a data project, you know, in order to normalize data, which is a big component of it. So, you know, I think we'll start to see more in the kind of AI machine learning world as, you know, either the data gets democratized across silos within a given enterprise or organization, or, you know, whether it becomes kind of like from an integration perspective, that all these cloud systems are talking. And so there has to be, to me, a generational turnover of some of these legacy systems and kind of get that data available. And like, I think we all hear, you know, like data is the new oil, but I truly believe that that's where supply chain is going, is to kind of merge, you know, the trends of what's happening at a macro level to push and respond with what's going on at the localized level in a number of ways. And, you know, from a supply chain intelligence expectation perspective, you know, understanding what you and your peers are doing and what you should be doing are like 2 different things. And I think that's where ultimately we're going with this is, you know, we're starting to get some maturation in terms of, you know, supply chain around direct to consumer and omnichannel, which was a big disruptor for a lot of the market. And that pushed us into an execution phase. And so as we come out of an execution phase and we can kind of see the forest from the trees, that gets us to a planning phase. And then the planning phase gets us to the intelligence phase. And so that's, in my experience, that's the direction we're going.
You know, I've been on a number of large projects and have a bit of a mongrel dog pedigree, right? So data quality is important, right? And we did actually had an academic study with one of our partners out of University of Arkansas that talked about big data, right? And more data in and of itself can create very murky water if you don't have good data quality. And if you just bury people in more data, sometimes it doesn't give you insight or perspective that allows you to take thoughtful decisions or limit your choices, which is ultimately what happened. I spent some time running client service at the Nielsen company too. And when you got to the C-suite, they always say, I don't want more of your data. I want your perspective and I want your recommendations so I can make a well-founded set of choices, right? And I think that's what we're seeing happen on the data side. I don't know if you guys want to expand upon that. We've got a couple more specific questions. I think we've kind of addressed the second question. It says, this one's kind of for Justin. It says, we mostly picked a palette for retail customers using SAP's WMS. We struggle to automate performance metrics. Any recommendations on a set of KPIs or metrics they might use to improve the use of their legacy system? Either one of you can jump in there.
Yeah, maybe I'll start and then, you know, Jerome, feel free to hop in. But, you know, it's probably not a coincidence that I would take it back to exactly what the 3 R's here in this conversation, starting with readiness and process. You know, to me, it's important to define, you know, the process itself and the expectations of output of those processes. You know, you could do time studies as an example from an engineering perspective without the technology in place to just kind of get a current state snapshot of what you're doing. You know, that's like I'm an industrial engineer from Georgia Tech by trade. So that was, you know, something that I had to study in school, you know, starting there just to kind of understand what the baseline is. And then from a technology perspective, you know, there are, you know, it kind of comes down to what data do you have available in those systems. Without like a labor management system, you should be able to get to the data in a sense of like what are the productivity metrics, but you may not be able to measure it against like a standard without like a labor management system. And so like within SAP, simply taking and marrying what is the output of a given associate, you may not have like the time clock integration to understand how much time that they're doing that for, but that's where like the industrial engineering and overlaying the time study on top can marry those two things together to form kind of like your baseline. So that would be how I would approach it, maybe in that legacy world.
Yeah, and also, I guess doing qualitative checks too, and how frequently do you review what your pick the pallet strategy is, or how much variability you have for unique retail customers, right? I spent time in that space. I went from 3 versions of SAP to 1 version for a large Fortune 20 company. It was my job in order to cash, and it was not easy. And we discovered through, assessment and validation, a lot of variance in what we thought we had in our systems and what was real, right? And I think that's the core, going out and finding out what you actually have versus what the system says you have, and then also going back to your trading partners who now are more open to this type of discussion because product supply and availability is so high, to make recommendations. And you guys started out discussing how you understand the multiple aspects of different constituencies, bringing people to the table that might be able to address that and say, why is this occurring? If we didn't have the situation we have now, is this what we would design? And I think that process of change management is essential to constantly assess your current situation. We've actually run up almost to the time. I don't see any more critical questions. I'm sorry if I missed anyone. Is there anything you guys would like to close with as we kind of sign off today? And first of all, I want to thank you both for doing this for our membership and the public at large. The supply chain professionals need to continue to improve. Our mission is connect, educate, and advance the supply chain profession, and you guys have helped do that today. So I'll let you guys make any closing comments, and then I'll thank everyone again, and we'll sign off.
I'd like to thank Chris and CSCMP for inviting us in, and obviously our partners at Deposco for joining us today in this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, couldn't have said it any better there, Jerome. Thanks to the CSCMP team and Jerome as well. Truly enjoyed the conversation here today.
I think it's been productive. I thank you both for sharing insights into ways we can all do things better. I'll do a quick commercial. We're excited that we're building the next EDGE conference in Nashville in September of this year. It'll be more exciting than ever. We were excited to have everyone back together for the first time in 2 years in Atlanta. Very productive event, and we can't wait to begin to share some of the aspects. Registration is open, so register early and often, and we will appreciate it, and hopefully see all of you in Nashville in September at the Gaylord property. Nick, thanks very much for enabling us today and keeping us on track. Very much appreciated for your support, and we'll sign off and thank everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.